This is what it sounds like when you know that the development of teen executive functioning skills changes everything.
But as they develop their executive functioning skills, that other behavior gets reduced. It's pretty fascinating how that can work.
Welcome to the Turning Winds podcast. My name is Kevin Zundel. Turning Winds provides a full continuum of care for teens who would benefit from key clinical and academic support at the most pivotal time in their lives. Today, I speak with clinical expert Jared Sartell on insights into executive functioning of the developing teen brain. I've spoken about my personal story and one of my sons a little bit, and I'd like to start with academics, but not just grades, but everything that sometimes goes along with it. But there's sometimes where he's truly aspirational. He really wants to do well. And then other times it doesn't matter, or you've done the assignment. Why don't you just hand it in? And I'm trying to figure out, is there a self-sabotage element to it, or is there something else that's distracting him?
Yeah, that's a super good question. Without really knowing your son, it would be hard to answer that. What I can say is that several things that you hit on come back to the skills of executive functioning. There's a set of 15 executive functioning skills that we need to have in order to operate as an adult in a semi-healthy, semi-functioning way. What we also know is that they can be fairly abstract in nature, and people don't really start developing them until early adolescence to mid-adolescence. And so when there's a common refrain that we're not fully developed until our mid-20s. Essentially, what that is saying is that you're still developing the cognitive capacity for using the executive functions. And so by mid-25, most people, most of the places they have more or less developed executive functioning skills. And so probably with your son, it's a mixture of hormones, a mixture of just social identity stuff, and it's a mixture of executive functioning deficits, areas where he just has not naturally developed. So each of us naturally develop executive functioning skills just on our own, and it tends to start happening in early adolescence. But we all have some that we're naturally really good at without having to pay attention to, and there are others that we maybe are not naturally good at, that we have to pay attention to. What happens is when we're little kids, the adults around us just understand that we're going to be bad at executive function. And this is all subconscious processing. And so we make up for our kids' lack. Like there's grace there, like they're allowed to make the mistakes, that kind of stuff. But what happens in our society specifically is when you get into middle school or the middle of middle school, all of the sudden the expectations change for our kids. We have this inherent belief that they should be able to do the thing. And the thing is whatever the executive functioning that would be involved in that process. So they should be able to turn their homework in when they've done. That's one of the executive functions. It's called initiating activity. Or they know how to do this math. They should be able to do this homework. Or they should be able to do this. Or they should be able to do that. And so as we're raising our kids, we teach them these skills to live in society, but there's a lot of room for them to not develop them and us not realize it because we just give them grace. And so in middle school, that grace goes away. And so the kids all of a sudden have these demands on skills that they may or may not have been taught overtly. And their brains, even if they've been taught, may or may not be able to actually do it yet. But we as adults just have decided, all right, at this stage, they should be able to do this. And that's not necessarily wrong, and so my guess is like with your son or those kids that, that do bad things or do things that are wrong and they know it, very likely they're executive functioning deficits that we do. So as adults, we either naturally develop or get better at enough of them to be able to survive, or we find healthy compensations. And so there's an executive function called working memory. That's the ability to recognize that something is important enough for you to need to be able to remember it and retrieve it in the short term, and the ability to then retreat in the short term. My working memory is trash, and it's probably always going to be, probably always was. And I have worked to develop my working memory, but I think I've hit like the limit. And so I carry the smartphone on me, and I'm not a tech guy, and I'm not really a phone guy either. But if you see me playing on my phone, there's a really high likelihood that I'm emailing myself a reminder to do something, because my working memory, like I'll be driving and thinking, oh, I need to do this thing. And if I don't do it immediately, there's a really good chance I'm going to forget to do it. And so I have found a healthy workaround, a healthy compensation for an area that I'm not going to get any stronger. And so with these executive functions, with our kids, we don't necessarily know what their deficits are, their true deficits are, until adolescence, and they keep failing to meet the expectations that we have for them. And it's important to realize, oh, maybe they're failing to do it because their brain hasn't developed the capacity. And so then they need more focused guidance and coaching on developing these certain skills that will allow them to perform in the way that the world is going to expect it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's something as you're talking, I try to remind myself of certain things that if he's looking older and older, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's quite there yet. Just
That's
because
right.
he's broader and taller and
Yeah.
all of that.
And maybe using language that is older person kind of language.
Exactly. So the grace that I think that we give them when they're younger, it's they're 5 years old. Of course they can't
That's right.
process this.
That's right.
It quickly can escalate into anger and conflict because you're now expecting them to act like a 30-year-old when they are 14. Yeah, and it could be compounded if they do have a diagnosis or an identified disorder. It presented itself physically, you might give them additional grace, but you don't in certain cases. And this, because you're treating them as a peer, as opposed to someone that you really actively parent, which is why I think it's sometimes important to be more receptive of the idea of treatment, because these are things that are more easily maintained and observed and worked through because it's done on a daily basis.
Yeah, and it's a concentrated form, and the treatment providers can see it it's a concentrated form. And so if I were a therapist and an outpatient, which I've done before, you'd have to have a year's worth of weekly sessions and cut through their presentation to see some of this stuff perhaps. Whereas in a place like Turning Winds, it's here and it's being seen and the deficits are present and being addressed. And then we can put it together. Okay, this kid struggles with these certain executive functions, and we can help them develop those executive functions or develop healthy compensations for those. What's even more difficult about it, Kevin, for adolescents is we can apply accidentally, again, we can apply the same standards for a 13-year-old that we do a 15-year-old. Now, there are fundamental differences between the 13-year-old brain and the 15-year-old brain. Or what's more, a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old. There are profound fundamental differences between a 15-year-old brain and a 17-year-old. So it's very common for us to have a kid that is 14 years old, but 6 foot tall. And in your brain, you're not recognizing, I'm talking to a child right now because he's 6 inches taller than I am. And that happens all of the time. And that's also why we use the team format at Turning Winds, because if I'm miscalibrated because of something like that, somebody else is probably accurately calibrated. And so as a team, we can talk about it and recognize, okay, so this kid's 6 foot tall and he uses these sorts of languages, but he's actually only 14. And we have to remember that our interventions need to be based on that.
And in some cases, we have a kid that is 6 foot tall, 14, that developmentally is like 12.
And so there can be all sorts of quagmires for these kids because they have these different levels of expectations that may have nothing to do with their actual capability.
Knowing all that to be true, how do we teach accountability and how do we foster growth? Because I think too often we fall into shame. And what are we really doing when we demean them as a result of the fact that their brains aren't developed with expectations that are unrealistic.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm grateful that you brought that up. The shame comes from our belief that they should be able to do something. And that's an us problem. And that attack comes from the belief that you should be able to do something. Like we have this belief that they ought to have a different set of skills that they have. I'll give you an example. I have a son that's 9 years old, and I love him dearly most of the time. But a couple months ago, I found myself hating him a little bit. He has interests that I have no interest in whatsoever. He wants to spend his time in ways that I think are just a waste. And without realizing it, I was being pretty judgmental of my son, and I was in a sideways movie, like I doing and saying things that were not mean on the face of it, but demonstrated a lack of regard. And I was concerned about the nature of my relationship with my son and how do I have a better relationship with my son, and had to come to the reckoning that it's totally a me problem. I was being judgmental, and then that was coming out towards him. And so when I decided I'm going to meet him where he's at, and I'm going to sit down and watch Minecraft YouTube videos with him just to be with my son, completely and utterly changed the nature of our relationship because I recognize this is a me problem. I'm calibrated improperly to my son and made a change. We don't actually remove accountability from them, but we apply it in a way that's better calibrated to their abilities. And so we have to really know ourselves well as parents. And we have to really know our kids well. Like my expectations of my 9-year-old son were not calibrated very well to a 9-year-old kid. They were calibrated more towards my 17-year-old daughter, who was a completely different human being. But that doesn't mean like there are still expectations for him. He doesn't just get to do what he wants on YouTube. He still has accountability for those things that he's responsible for, but they're calibrated to a 9-year-old. And so when we're parents of a teenager, we have to know them well. We have to have a good, healthy relationship with them on an intimate level to be able to tap into our own intuition about our kids. We have to have expectations for them, and they need to be high expectations for them. And they need to be accountable to those, but they have to be within reason as well. Like you can't reasonably ask a 14-year-old kid to do the same sorts of abstract thinking that you would ask an 18-year-old kid. The problem is we lump them all together with adults as well. Our penal systems are full of people that struggle with executive functioning, and it came out sideways and we punished them. Now, they may or may not have deserved whatever consequence they've received because of their actions, but I guarantee that executive functioning, like if you can't hold down a job because you can't get somewhere on time, you're more likely to engage in other behaviors to get your needs met. Or if you like to engage in risky behavior because it's fun and you can't stop yourself, which is the inhibition of impulses, executive function, then you're more likely to do dangerous things and have negative consequences. And so what we do at Turning Winds is we teach them overtly about the executive functions. I tend to have the kids do some self-assessments and then prioritize which ones they probably need to get better at. And then we have workbooks and exercises that we have them do. And so that's what we do in our clinical practice is at Turning Winds regarding the executive functions. And it's funny how we'll see a kid that struggles with addiction, that struggles with all of these things over on the side that look like they're the main focus. But as they develop their executive functioning skills, that other behavior gets reduced. It's pretty fascinating how that can work. If you can be a capable person in your world, you're less likely to make really poor choices.
If this gives you hope that the right people in the right setting can make the difference for your teen, I highly encourage you to listen to the many other episodes here and consider hitting the like and subscribe button to make sure you don't miss out. And try taking the second to pick up the phone and giving Turning Winds a call to share your situation at 800-845-1380. There's also a wealth of resources available to you on their website at turningwinds.com.